go. Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of ASCII Anything, brought to you by Moser Consulting. I'm Tim Mack, your guest host for this episode. This is part 3 of a 3-part discussion with Moser expert John Murphy on healthcare data modeling, interoperability, and governance. This final part covers master data management and the implementation timeline.
So this is what RDM needs to do. It needs to allow for the ingestion of new codes, wrapping from source to conform enterprise values, right? Interface with the physical data stores. There are dedicated applications for this. My last client, they were half a decade ahead of us with a reference data management tool that all their systems talk to. And the warehouse we were building tapped straight into that. And they tapped straight into the common code or the unified code processing supported by UDMH, right? It was a drop-in piece of the work. So RDM is a requirement because, it doesn't work without it. Master data management and the security data management and the data quality management are requirements for a couple of reasons. Again, this data is data that misused will kill people. This data will get you into all the trouble that data leakage gets you into and spam and the like. It's sensitive data. It's important data. It's valuable data. You can sell a lot of this stuff. The knowledge you can learn off somebody else's dime. You can sell it. So that's just private data. So that means we need to identify, then manage the data that drives us to that sensitivity, right? And the primary, and not only that, we want to know from a quality standpoint, the experience of patient, persons, members, and practitioners over time. We want to know the practitioners that are doing good work, that aren't doing good work, the organizations that have processes under control, and the ones that don't. We want to be able to protect patients and persons and our members, right? So there's a couple of reasons we get into the sensitivity requirement, but that's what's driving master data management. I don't want the same patient referenced on my systems 25 times. I want to be able to conform my patient into a single instance of patient. I would love to get patient data clean enough that I can use their name and social security number and address and all of that data that I would score from a confidence standpoint to understand that that's all the same person. The holy grail of analytics in healthcare is to get a person's medical history. I want to know it across the 4 healthcare systems in Indianapolis. I want to know my visits over the past 40 years to St. Vincent's that I'm the same patient. I want them all eventually to know that I'm the same person. That almost certainly means there's going to be government entities involved. That gets into the security thing. That's where the whole GDPR thing comes from in Europe, right? There are people that need to see this data that can misuse this data. And Europe's been through enough with their governments over time that they want an off-ramp for that. All of that gets us into being able to manage our data around the core concepts as in master data management. This is definitely a piece of the tool. That scoring, and I forget what CDMP calls it. There's a term for taking a certain set of data, and if it is equivalent across different versions, you can confidently say that's the same instance of something. There's a confidence scoring system. I wrote one of those manually. Well, I designed one. Somebody else wrote it. That I wasn't the coder. Back in 2000 at Mutual of Omaha, right? So these things have been around. The need for these things have been around for a long time. What MDM tools do for you is run those processes robustly, right? So that just tells us who the patients are and who the persons are and who my practitioners are. It allows my systems, and by the way, the application systems tap into this MDM capability too. My applications, my reporting structures, my core warehouses, all of the things that I use this data for will subscribe to this capability, right? And that allows us to pull somebody up on the phone and say, are you this person? They say, yes. And now I know I can use that patient identification as I admit them on this new encounter, right? That's a very simple use case to show you what you do with MDM tools. To get the person to do that with the confidence scoring absolutely requires a tool. The good news is Purview has one, and IBM has one within their knowledge catalog. The unfortunate part, and this is kind of humorous how much confusion this is sown over the time. Their tool for master data management, which has got an abbreviation of MDM, is called MDM. The registered name for the tool is MDM. So we never really know if we're talking about the tool or process, but that's what it does, right? It allows us to manage patients as a population of patients, identifying a patient uniquely, identifying members uniquely within a payer system, identifying my practitioners even when I don't have an MPI number for them as a unique practitioner, et cetera. And that allows me to then confidently use that data in the transacting of healthcare delivery. These practitioners are the practitioners in the PV1 segment in HL7, that is the attending physician, the admitting physician, the other physicians, right? And this gets into all of the data quality points we talked about so far. I want to know the practitioner is able to do the services they're providing. And when I record a certain practitioner as the paying practitioner, pay to practitioner on my head, I want to make sure the right practitioner is getting compensated, right? So all of this data quality is necessary to make all of these processes run. And the data quality is enhanced and enabled and distributed out of these master data management tools. Now, the good news is all of the entities and the data you would create in a master data management tool are represented by master data tables in UDMH in my data store and my catalog. By the way, MDM works against the catalog, right? So the MDM rule set I have for patients is pointing to the entity, the concept, and the related concept of the patient definition, of the member definition, the practitioner definitions, right? My practitioner definitions in master data management might be, are you up to date on your continuing education? It's a critical thing in practitioner management. We have an education table, I forget what we call it in UDMH, continuing education table in UDMH. So that data is in the database. It's in the data catalog. It's managed by the tool. And that's what master data management does. It's a large part of the enabling of the data quality as these concepts interact with the data that we create out of healthcare management. I think I only have one slide on data quality management. That does not mean it's not important. It just means that it's an easy thing. It's a relatively straightforward thing to describe in the concept of data management, especially data management tooling. The only other option is to go into all of the things this applies, which is, I've talked a long time now. I would triplicate the length of time about what it means to define data quality at the entity and attribute level within healthcare. Just understand that this is a profound set of requirements too. The nice thing about IKC and Purview both have a defined set of data quality rules that you can tag to data. And when the systems integrate with all of this, that knows to exercise, look at, manage that piece of data quality definition, that rule. There are a lot of rules around data quality in this industry. It would be highly unlikely that you can do it manually, right? So commercial tools have become a requirement to this. IKC, Purview, and other data quality tools are those tools. I don't see it as being anything other than a requirement in the industry. The tool, what these do for you is it tracks quality until trust is reached and sustained. It measures data. Yeah, it's in control. And this is an iterative process. Next month, it measures the data. It's still in control. Eventually, you trust the data. This data is out of control. Data is getting worse. The data is getting better until it's in control. The data tools continuously track this data until the data becomes trusted on a sustainable basis, right? That's what they do for a living. And all of the primary data stores, data engines will tap into these sorts of tooling. Purview definitely talks to Microsoft tools. IKC is pretty good across technologies. All right. So basically what the slide is saying is data quality is a thing. There's a lot of it. There's a lot of rules in this rule set. They've been defined and recorded in these tools by the people that sell, the vendors that sell these products. You can tap into these and tie them into the data that we have in the catalog. And you can do that, and you can tap into the data that is in your data stores defined by this data catalog related to these data quality tools until the data improves and is trusted. Or it falls out of trust. You've been doing it well, got a new person in, don't know what they're doing on clinical orders. Oops, isn't doing it right, falls out of compliance, right? So it's a continuous process. And both tools support it. And I don't have screen prints of either because that's on the firewall side of the data presentation for this stuff, right? Just know that they both do it. Which then finally gets us into the security management. And I'm going to pick on the two big security management definitions. And a lot of this, especially in healthcare, has intuitively and consciously been managed over time simply because it's a fairly ethical business. You can say anything you want about the finances, but these guys, healthcare is really trying to make outcomes happen, right? So they know that there's risky data and important data and data that we don't want the wrong people involved in. And I was at Ascension when they had the data breach. The reason I left Ascension is they ran out of money because the data breach took all their discretionary money away, right? So when you fall out of compliance, when you get hit by these data breaches, it's a thing. I worked with a lot of very stressed out people in the May of 2024. It was a hard thing to watch. And that was 2, 3 years after COVID. They were pretty done, right? So that it's the same level of thing. So data governance catalog, series of system definitions, concept definitions, data definitions, and the like. And you can tag a lot of this stuff against certain pieces of the HIPAA, GDPR, and any other relevant security requirement, SOC 2, for instance, right? The definition of things that need to be tracked and how they need to be tracked is something you flag again in these data management tools. That's what the data governance tool does for you. Again, we can go out to the database and the DDL and tag, I think you can manually set these tags. Don't want to do it with 60,000 data elements. The scale of this stuff says a tool needs to happen. Good news is the tools are out there to do it both in IKCN and Purview. At various levels, all sorts of implications and things you do in security management. And there's 4 or 5 different pieces of it in Purview. I've been studying that lately. It doesn't happen without a tool, right? So you're going to pick a tool, you're going to put your catalog in there, and you're going to manage the security of the data you're going to start the management security through these tools.
Yep, I'd say one more thing to think about. I'm sure healthcare data specifically, but your database engines all have the ability to encrypt data files. Most database engines are doing it at 256-bit encryption already. Just something for all of you out there listening. You need to be aware that you need to start thinking higher levels of encryption. You're going to be thinking, why do I need to think about that? A quantum computer, if it ever becomes available, could crack 256-bit encryption in about 4 hours. So start
Yeah.
thinking higher levels of encryption to deal with that eventuality coming out there. You probably have a few years to do something about it, but one of the things I recently attended an event and they talked about what if your data got exfiltrated today and held for 10 years and a quantum computer came along and they could crack it? What would be available to them because you didn't have a high enough level
Right.
of encryption on it? So just something to think about.
What's the practical limit of that? So 256 takes a certain amount of overhead to do.
Correct.
Is there a practical limit to that yet with existing technology?
What I've seen with the database engine platforms, they are pushing 1,024 now and very little overhead on it. So it's something that you can easily do, and I would almost bet that like the Amazons of the world and the Azures of the world and Oracle Cloud Infrastructure and Google all are doing similar things with
Right.
data on their cloud platforms.
Yep. Okay.
John, I think we're ready for the next question is what skills and tools do teams need to execute this today?
So one of the themes I've had today is that these standards don't change much in the form of the requirements, what you need for projects. And my bias and my background is in the business. I tell people I come at this as an MBA, not a DBA. So all the important things at the top here are all the business facing stuff. Now, clearly you need a lot of technical help in these relatively complex tooling that we have anymore. But ultimately, managing healthcare data is a healthcare business question. I need to know what data do I secure? I have to go out to the people that are managing the master data, party data that understand GDPR and understand HIPAA and say, what data in my catalog do I need to tag as PII, as some other regimen that needs to be identified? The people that work with this data that understand security at a requirement level, not at a technical level, not how to encrypt a piece of data on a database, but what data to encrypt on a database is a business question. And I'll stick to that story, right? So we need system subject matter experts. I want to do analysis on my cancer outcomes. I need to have people that understand oncology data that understand the subject matter usually is the source subject matter. What is Cerner telling me about my experience or recording about my experience with my cancer patients? That's what I mean by a subject matter expert. And I lead with them. And I got in a chat with some of our management around here. Moser is a very technical company, and I'm not a technical person unless I am bludgeoned to have to do it, about how many BAs I want a project. And I said, more, right? I want more SMEs. The problem is they're the value people in the company. They're the people doing this business day in and day out. But you need subject matter experts and you need business analysts. I'm not a hospital employee. I haven't really been in 25 years. but I understand the nature of the data in this world and how to put it into a data model and how to pull it out into a FHIR message from a content standpoint, or what data to pull out and how to build it from a content standpoint, right? So I'm a decent business analyst. I want as many of those as I can get because they are not going to generally hinder the management of the data of the business day to day. Pulling all the subject matter experts out of the wards, out of the pharmacy ward, out of the nursing ward on the third floor will break your business. So I can't do that, but I need some. I will take as many business analysts as you give me. It will help me translate the data, ask the questions about security, ask the questions about PII, ask the question about transforming values and formats and the like, right? So that's what I'm going to do in my data modeling, in my message creation, in my load and my ETL instructions, right? So that I need as many of those as I can get. And data stewards break the ties. If I have a Cerner person in the room and an Epic person in the room and it comes up, what value do I want in my core warehouse? They're going to fight about it until the project dies. I've had project dies because terminology and definitions and data types, there was no mechanism to resolve conflict. So it just got ugly and everybody said, yeah, we'll try again later. The data store breaks those ties. They own the output of the data. They own the data capability, or at least the definition of the data capability, right? Product owners group all these data stores together and says, here's what I need to do. And they're on the hook for making sure it gets done. Now, the three people above these people are the primary executioners of making it happen, which is why I listed them first. So I'm actually listing these people usually from seniority on down, right? Product owners are the senior people in this case. I need a data architect. There's 100 different ways to do the same kind of work. And I need somebody just to decide which parts they want to emphasize, what technology gets brought to bear, what message queuing system I'm going to use, what database I'm going to use, how these two need to talk to each other. Am I going to build a core warehouse? Am I going to build these structures for reporting and analytics, or those structures? Do I need a data lake? So that data architect needs to be able to tell that story. And none of this happens. These are complicated, expensive projects. None of this happens without executive ownership. The skill set above is largely tool and technology agnostic. I don't care what database you put my encounter on. You're going to have an encounter. I'm going to define what the encounter is. These people are going to help me deploy that. Below that line, it does matter, right? So security access management experts, there's a general skill there to know what questions to ask about security and access management. The tooling, then they have to go deploy it on a specific tool. ETL developers will have some sort of coding engine to do. The DBAs will have to work in some environment, right? That's not an exhaustive list at the bottom. That's a business person telling you what technical skills you need, so take it with a grain of salt. You need enough people to make the technical architecture support the business architecture, right? So this story isn't different than it has been. The only thing you add to this is data scientists and like, because we do different things with some of the tools, but they're just business analysts, subject matter experts, data stewards on steroids. So I think the skill set is largely what you're used to in data integration projects. I've said that several times today. I think that's important. And I'll go back to my Watson. We can do this new thing because it's magic. There's no more magic in this system than there ever has been, right? This is still, I need to transform this data from this format and context into this data content and format and context, right? That's not a different story. The tooling is stronger. We get to do it faster. We get to do it with more data, but this is still the same story we've always had. I don't know how serious people want to get into data governance. There's a data management book of knowledge put out by the Data Management Association. It's a data management, it's a worldwide data governance management consortium. It's a certifying, if you would, a certifying organization. And they have a wonderful, relatively dense book on how to do data governance, right all the way through the whole process. And I love the way to describe the skills and roles and responsibilities. Their concept of a data governance office is powerful because you've got to manage very important, very expensive, relatively expensive, very confident people. The people that know this business well enough know that they know this business. They have opinions, they have experience, they have pain points, they have a history, right? And so this is a relatively complicated personal environment to manage. Data governance offices are relatively difficult to create and I think are pretty critical. I like Dama's description of the skills, roles, and responsibilities within data governance capabilities. That's a subscription. I pointed out, I'm not telling you to go buy it. that's a subscription. So you have to buy the book and subscribe for a bit to DAMA, I think, to get the book, right? But for me, it was very much worth it. It's what I do, right? So the tools necessary for integration projects, these haven't changed. Even though they've got on cloud, they've got different names, but they do the same things, right? Azure doesn't do anything much different than SQL Server did for the basic user, right? The licensing and the deployment and the management are different. That's a technical question. I don't care. And Moser hasn't made me care. You need a data modeling tool, and they're relatively expensive. We developed UDMH on a cool tool called FHIR Data Architect. Just like UDMH is no longer available. They didn't sell enough of it to keep support of the tool around, which is unfortunate. They had some nice data lineage capabilities to it. Irwin, whatever Embarcadero's ER Studios called these days, they all work, right? This is just model structures. UDMH was delivered in Irwin. And so wherever you need to start with this stuff, you need a data modeling tool. You need a full-featured data governance tool, and the two I've talked about today are Knowledge Catalog and Purview. There are others. It's hard to argue with Microsoft as a vendor not being an option, right? So we'll talk about Microsoft's Purview. It's getting acceptance in the market. Knowledge Catalog is getting acceptance in the healthcare space because there's so much going on. Version control, Git's the answer. I don't know how clever people want to get about version control, but it's universal. It's easy. I non-technical guy, deployed this on one of Moser's machines one day and played around with it. So it's not hard, and it's critical, right? So you're going to have versions of models, versions of ETL data sets, I think a lot of the Purview and Knowledge Catalog do a lot of versioning of the content there, but anything else, all of the coding and all of the documentation is useful to have version control. Project management is another key. There's some people at Moser who would laugh at me saying that. There's a lot of moving parts here. These are complicated projects. A project management office is nice, right? So these, at any scale, more than one project manager is nice. And so you're going to need a uniform project management tool. Fortunately, there's a lot of those out there too. ETL tools depend on the platform you're on. Informatica, SSIS, though that's going away to be replaced by something. My last client was using SSIS because it was legacy. And the last one I want to point out, and I never want to deprecate this, because there's a lot of user friendliness about Excel as a mapping tool. It's very visual, it's very relational, it's very explicit, it's powerful. You could do reporting and summarizations and counting and a lot of that stuff for project management reporting, and a lot of that stuff you can ingest into governance tools and data model tools and other tools that you would have, can be versioned in Git and the like. And it's just easy for people to look at a set of tables and columns from the source, an equivalent set of tables and columns in the target, and that's your source to target map. It's easy, it's flexible, can tell a lot of stories simultaneously. It's scalable, right? It's on your desktop. It's universally known. So as a tool necessary for integration projects, I probably spend more time in Excel than I do in anything else. And let me tell you, in the context of UDMH, people say that building the three models took a lot of time. And we built our business data model first, and we mapped it to a series of HL7 messages and content that would allow us to do a drug interaction engine, a pharmacy order interaction. So we were tracking pharmacy orders and comparing them for a patient on what they've had before, how much of it they've had, if they've had allergies, et cetera, and negative outcomes, adverse outcomes. Right. So we needed enough data in the database to support that, including the business model, the atomic model, and both the content and the analytics out of the dimensional model. And we did that between January 7th of 2011 and July 20th of 2011. Right. So it took us 7 months, 6.5 months to get that sort of application done in a data model. We did all of the mapping in Excel. We finished the mapping probably, and the data architecture. We built the architecture, the technical architecture in the first quarter. The second quarter, we finished the mapping and did the business modeling. That took about 3 weeks. The atomic model took about 2 weeks, and we did the dimensional model at the same time, right? And then we spent the other 5 or 6 weeks in the source to target, and the target source mapping is rich, and it was, and our QA went pretty well. So the data modeling is not the hard part. It's this mapping and recording and learning that you do took the traditional 60% of the time. Modeling took 20, 5% of the time, and the QA and the application took 15% of the time. That was a ratio you hear a lot, and that's a ratio that worked out when we built UDMH.
I was going to say, John, the next question is what's the 6-month roadmap for FHIR UDMH initiative? You kind of did a little there. I'm sure you have some more details in your next slides.
Clock starts when the scope is agreed upon. So we have to agree what 6 months mean. I've spent years defining scope, right? So assuming that that was what the project was going to do and then work out in 6 months was a big ask. So I'm making a deliberating assumption is what I call them, is that we know what the scope is. And 6 months for most healthcare providers around the world would be a proof of concept. So that's another thing to concern yourself with, to understand. And you need the people assigned to the project. We will spend 6 months trying to work around not having the SME around available for us, right? So 6 months is aggressive. We had really good people on the UDMH development project. First of all, we had a modeling team in Ireland that had collectively hundreds of years experience with the tool, with modeling, with the platforms, with the international healthcare standards, and we tapped into them hard, right? So your people have to be in place because you can't build skills in 6 months. Another assumption is environment of fully deployed technical components is usually not practical in 6 months. We have to get people used to Azure, deployed in Azure, have access to Azure, have all of the things, and the data governance tool, and the modeling tool, and right, so and the messaging queue, and whatever other technical artifacts there are. You won't get done with that in 6 months, and it's okay to not have it all done in 6 months. There's things you're going to add to this as you go along. Your reference data management capability, your master data management capability won't go from 0 to 6 months, 0 to full to finished in 6 months. That's okay. These capabilities build over time. So what then does it? So the minimum requirements of delivery is the security defined for the delivery of this integrated. So what's my end state look like? I do need the security defined on PII, health information, and financial data, right? I don't get to have a second set of eyes look at any of this data if it's not protected by this tooling. It's a fundamental requirement of healthcare implementations. The data access definitions, who can get to the data and how they can get to it needs to be identified. The data that's in scope, that is the master data, needs to be defined. If I'm doing the experience of my patients in cancer oncology, right, I need diagnosis codes. I need patients. I need the encounters probably because it's all in the concept of encounters. And the oncologists and the people that the practitioners are involved. Those are the sorts of things I ought to expect to be deliverable in 6 months. And that's from a data standpoint, it's relatively straightforward. My RDM and MDM systems growing into this is expected, as I said in the previous screen, but I will have a patient table. I'll have a practitioner table. I'll know what I mean by practitioners and what the limits of practitioner means. I'll know what the diagnosis codes I care about for oncology. All of that master reference data will be in the database. I'll have my code processing system in place. There's just no going forward without that stuff. Now, the process to deploy this stuff, it can grow over time, but I need to be able to store common codes. I get a surprising amount of projects that were I need this system in a warehouse. Again, I do core warehouse. That's unusual. Usually I want to know that my recidivism, I don't know what the term you use in oncology, my recidivism on patients that showed this diagnosis is reducing by 20% in the 6 months that I've done this, or the last 12 months. So I need to build an analytical requirement for something that describes value. Oddly enough, in my last client with, again, 150 hospitals, jillions of employees, and all sorts of 15% of the US healthcare experience in the country, right? It's a big hospital system. Their proof of concept was around bed census. And I did that to them on purpose. I said, I recommend it, and they agreed. And I said, here's why I'm going to recommend that. Knowing that their reference data and their master data management was not going to be able to support the requirement. Told them that you're going to get done with a kind of bed census in the next 6 months. And then you're going to have to decide how to improve the data around your bed census. They can't, across the country, identify all their beds at the bed level. And I knew that to be true. That's fundamental master data in healthcare. The initial analytics they did is how many people do I have in my beds and what beds do I have them in at midnight every night? And they couldn't identify the beds. And I knew that. They do that. They do what I was asking them to do. And we even talked about it. But they decided that because it got them to practitioners. That's who does the census. It got them to patient. It got them to point of care location. It got them to a lot of the fundamental data that they do all the other things in healthcare with. And they were okay with, okay, after 6 months, what next? There is a next. They knew they had to do some more. analysis, data definition, research, discovery, deployment. That's the nature of these projects, right? So in my almost infinitely inadequate user interface definition and visualizations, here's what I think timelines look like, right? At the top is the integration architecture. You are going to be building this right past the 6 months. You're going to be adding pieces to this over time, but there are pieces that need to be put in place. The access, the security, the ability to identify PII, the ability to deploy the identification of the PII into the database that we're creating, the data source that we're creating, right? So the integration infrastructure, I just included as a big bar, is just you build it, you keep building it. From a development standpoint, in any useful proof of concept level effort, I did 2 months worth of source to target mapping, then data map and then data modeling. Then I couldn't make that box smaller and keep it in one box, my text in one box the same size. So that's a little overstating how long target to source mapping does. But once I get to knowing what my integration architecture needs in terms of load dates, effective dates, valid to dates, valid from dates, business keys, technical keys, I know what the technical rules for my target to source mapping is. And then the rest of it, the business part, is just transposing the source to target mapping into the target to source map. That's probably overstated there. It usually goes pretty quickly because the discovery is largely in the source to target mapping. I spend a month of the 6 months in the loading, the developing, designing, and the like. And if I was to do this right, the loading, the definition of the ETL and the like, this is the ETL. We'll start halfway through the target to source mapping. We'll interact with the ETL designers, the ETL coders, the ETL architects to understand what they need from a data standpoint, from the technical standpoint, to be able to do this, and introduce them into the structures that we're creating, that we know what our data model looks like. And here's what that means from an ETL standpoint. There's overlap in the target to source mapping and the loading. And the last month of it, as I said, in that pharmacy quality application we did, the last 5 weeks out of the 6 months was QA and deploy. Source to target mapping is our discovery. We're assuming scope. Data modeling is mechanical if we're following things that we did in the UDMH, right? So we knew how to do that relatively quickly. Target the source mapping. A lot of it has to do with defining assumptions, what we need for technical artifacts, seeing if they really work within the technical infrastructure, and kind of massaging on some of that stuff. ETL people have a new data model, probably a new architecture to worry about. They do some learning, they do some coding, they do some testing, and then the rest of the time we do deployment. The team is the same team we've always had. It's a project manager managing their unruly business analysts, data stewards, subject matter experts, the modelers, me, and that unruly crowd. And notice where I think the ETL team actually gets introduced to the project is in the middle of the data modeling. That's where my overlap is happening. So project managers are there the whole time, the BA, data stewards, SMEs, data modelers are there the whole time. ETL, ELT gets involved in the data modeling process, at least from an education standpoint, working out the technical implications of the data modeling and data architecture approach, getting used to the tools, those sorts of things, right? Making sure the tools are tapped into your technical infrastructure. I can put my DDL onto the technical architecture and execute it, and it really does work on that database. I think QA starts at the same time. And a lot of times my QAs are SMEs, BAs, and even the data storage. They need to learn the new data structures. They need to learn the new data approach. They need to learn what the target to source mapping tells us. And if they think that gets us to the end, right? So they're QAing the target to source map. They're watching, learning what the ETL people are doing during the load process. And so they're working out use cases they have to test. And then they are the ones executing the QA deploy phase, right? So I think that's notice that my business team is there the whole time. This is a business-focused process. One or more of these people are there the whole time. At least my data steward, at least my business analyst. I'll grab the SMEs as long as they let me grab them. All right. And the data modeler is, once it gets to target the source mapping, like they're instructors, right? Here's how you load the model. Here's why I think it works. Here's how it's worked in the past. Here's why I need a valid from and to data. I'm going to do these sorts of history analysis on my data. ETL people don't like that. ETL people don't get to win many arguments. I do listen more than I let on. But as a data modeler in a data warehouse that is history enabled, if you know Kimball, it's slowly changing dimension type 2 enabled. I track history on everything. That's got ETL implications. ETL people don't like the complexity and they push back. I need that for the basic functionality of my data stores, right? So that is what it is. From the tooling, we covered this earlier. The data governance tool is my basis for the universe once we start building it. So I need a data governance tool early and long, often. I need a data modeling tool, at least through the data modeling and executing the DDLs and giving it to the QA, to the ETL people and enabling the target the source. In reality, all three of these tools live forever. I'm going to version my tool, my models in my tool. I don't know why my PM tool ends at week 3, right? It's like project management goes on longer than that. I'll fix that. But essentially, the tooling is the backbone of the whole project. I would suggest all three of these tools are accessed ongoing. But in the middle, I think that's what the Devon team, that's what my 6 months look like, assuming I have scope, is I have a project manager managing business discovery and implementation, technical discovery and implementation, and QA implementation. Same team I've always had, same functions they've always done. They're doing it on better tools now. I'm either able to do my projects quicker or I get to do more stuff in the same amount of time. And the last thing is, here's what URLs I identified in here. In general, don't limit yourself to this stuff. There's a lot of data warehousing. There's a lot of data governance how-tos. I don't include, actually, I probably should have. I don't include Data Management Institute or the Data Management Association, right? So there's a rich set of data management capabilities recorded in there. So these are the tools, the definitions, the standards, the processes, and the like that I think you would want to explore.
Well, thank you for your time, John. It's been an interesting story and ride along through this today. And we'll be
Yep,
sure to post all those links that you have there to help people dig in a little more.
right. You are very welcome. I will talk to you soon.
Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of ASCII Anything, brought to you by Moser Consulting. We hope you enjoyed listening to the final piece of our three-part series with Moser expert John Murphy on healthcare data modeling, interoperability, and governance. Be sure to join us next time as we dive even deeper with our resident experts and what they're currently working on. Don't forget to share your idea or suggestions for topics on our social media. In the meantime, please remember to give us a rating and subscribe to our feed wherever you get your podcasts. Until then, so long, everybody.